Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get our program started. It is wonderful to see so many folks here gathered at Dallas College's Mountain View campus. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism for the Texas Tribune. Welcome to those joining us here in Dallas and those joining us online for our conversation today titled Inside the Interim, a conversation with Dallas lawmakers. We're joined today by State Senator Nathan Johnson and State Representative Morgan Meyer. Our moderator is Texas Tribune politics reporter James Barragan. Our program will run an hour with 45 minutes for conversation and 15 minutes for your questions. Here in Dallas, we have a mic stand right over here, and our virtual audience can ask questions via our Q&A portal. That's at texastribune.org/ask, texastribune.org/ask. We are grateful for the support of our sponsors for today's event. Our major sponsors are Methodist Healthcare Ministries, Texas State Technical College, the Commit Partnership, Raise Your Hand Texas, and Texas Association of Community Colleges. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. We do also want to thank our host, Dallas College, and here to offer a welcome on behalf of Dallas College's Mountain View campus is Dr. Macario Hernandez.
Thank you, everybody. We want to welcome everybody here and really want to thank the Texas Tribune for choosing this location. I hope that we're always welcome you anytime in the future. I think this is one of the most important kind of conversations we have to have in order for us to grow together and to build off each other. I'd like to share a little short. I was a student exactly 30 years ago in this very campus. So you imagine the full circle, the impact of these type of, and I never forget, seeing Bill Clinton here at Mountain View. Just think about the history we have of bringing people to talk to us and how impactful it makes in your life. I do want to give a shout out to our former Texas Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss. Just in our short conversation from the president's office to here, we seem to find a lot in common in public education. We seem to have a favorite former superintendent that we have in common. But it just shows how connected we are and how much more we have in common. But in order for us to share that story, we have to hear and listen to these type of dialogues so we can find a way to continue to come together. So it's just an honor being here, and I thank Dallas College for giving me this opportunity. I'm on my third week as president. But for them to actually invest and think about someone who actually went to the school here exactly 1994, coming out of Sunset High School, when I had no roaming these halls trying to find a way to register, to be sitting here in front of you as the president of this campus, to me is just an honor. I'm truly humbled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez. I also want to thank all those here and around the state who make the journalism of the Texas Tribune possible, including events like this, by becoming Texas Tribune members. To learn more and to become a member, you can visit texastribune.org/support. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that tickets are now on sale for Texas's breakout politics and policy event, the Texas Tribune Festival, which returns to downtown Austin September 5th through 7th. Join us for 3 days of conversation about the issues that matter to Texans at our annual celebration of big, bold ideas. You can purchase your tickets at tribfest.org and check out our speakers, including many that will be of interest to our Dallas audience today. Now let's get to know our panel. Senator Nathan Johnson represents almost 1 million Dallas County residents in Senate District 16. He's vice chair of the Jurisprudence Committee and a member of the Senate Committees on Business and Commerce, Water, Agriculture and Rural Affairs, and Administration. He also serves on the Texas Sunset Advisory Commission. first elected in 2014 and now in his 5th term as a Texas state representative. Morgan Meyer serves as chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and is a vocal leader on such issues as public education, the fight against human trafficking, and fiscal responsibility. He has authored and led to pass Texas' most comprehensive laws on trafficking, played an instrumental role in the passage of HB 3, the transformative school finance bill, and has led the charge to lower property taxes. And our moderator and my colleague, James Barragan, is a politics reporter for the Texas Tribune with a focus on accountability reporting. Prior to joining the Tribune, he worked as a State House reporter for the Dallas Morning News and had previous stints at the Austin American-Statesman and the Los Angeles Times. In 2021, he was a finalist for the Toner Prize for Excellence in Local Reporting for his coverage of Texas politics during the COVID-19 pandemic, and he just recently completed a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard University. I thank our panel and our audience for being here in Dallas and joining us online from around the state this afternoon. And with that, I turn the program over to James.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the introductions, and thank you all of you for being here. We're going to have hopefully a great conversation about local issues and then also about the makeup of the legislature next year and sort of what we can expect a little bit going into next year. I want to start off with talking about housing affordability. Both of you are big players in the property tax legislation and the discussion about lowering property taxes. But I want to shift that conversation a little bit to the actual affordability of housing. My colleague Joshua Fechter recently reported that there was a Harvard study that came out that home ownership in Texas is increasingly out of reach for many Texans because of the actual just cost of housing that there is in the United States outside of in Texas, outside of property taxes. So I just want to ask the broad question here about when it comes to housing affordability. We can talk about property taxes, but also outside of property taxes, are there other things that you all would like to see in terms of how the legislature can address this? And I'm thinking specifically about some of the ADU bills that came up last year, or if there need to be changes to how the state does zoning that could open up more housing. But just want to see what you all think and what options there are on the table.
Thank you, James, and thank Dallas College. Thank you to the Texas Tribune and to all of you for making a trip out here to the campus and for facilitating to the Tribune these really important conversations in what is not our 14th month of the interim, but rather our 8th month of the interim, thanks to special sessions and impeachment trials, so we can talk about very serious issues like affordable housing. In the Dallas area alone, over 3 years, the average price for an apartment went up 18%. It is very difficult. I think for every 100 people looking for an affordable homes, there's 25 available. This problem will solve itself if we don't solve it, which means no one will want to live here. We do need to solve it. I do not think that property taxes are what are keeping people from being able to afford homes. It's a very serious issue. We will discuss it. We will address it. I do think that there are policies that have been pursued with some success, mixed success in other states, most notably California, that could, depending on some regulatory things we set up through legislation, encourage the construction of more affordable housing. But I have talked with people in the housing industry, and they will tell you uniformly, the market will not build sufficient affordable housing, at least not as it's structured today. So we have to look for ways to incentivize the construction, the private construction of affordable housing. And we have really no appreciable mechanisms in place right now. We had a very small tax credit. I think it was $25 million for the entire state of 30 million people, which is like 50 cents a house. We're going to have a much more serious approach to it. I am looking at something during this interim that I hope will be significant. I have a few months left before the session starts. If we can get this into good shape, I don't even want to talk about it yet because I don't know if it'll work. But we have to find solutions. I don't know the answers right now, but I do know that it has newfound energy. I think the whole legislature is interested in this. So I'm optimistic that we will take much more aggressive and hopefully smart action on this next session.
Chairman Meyer.
Well, thank you again. Thank you all for having both Nathan and I here, Dallas College, Texas Tribune. Nathan, this is our third one of these, I believe, in the last couple of months. It's always a pleasure to be and an honor to be on the stage with you.
It is. Thank you.
So I agree with Nathan as it relates to incentivizing low-income housing. I believe there was a bill that came through our committee, Ways and Means, carried by Chairman Goldman, that did just that. I believe it was the bill you were just discussing, Nathan, talking about incentivizing tax credits to build more homes. And I think that's really a lot of the issue here. And that can also dovetail into issues dealing with local ordinances, and quite frankly, here in Dallas, with permitting. And there have been huge issues with permitting. And when you can't build the homes, you need more volume to be able to lower the cost of the homes. And right now, the permitting situation, specifically in Dallas, is bad. Talk to any home builder, talk to anybody who's trying to build a home, talk to anyone who's trying to build a development. It is extremely difficult right now to do so in Dallas. So I think we've got to take a look at literally the ground game on how we start these type of developments and how we make that a more streamlined process. How do we make it easier for folks to get in? And then I will respectfully disagree with you a little bit, James. I absolutely believe home affordability is absolutely tied to taxes. I mean, there's not anyone in this room who doesn't own a home that says, hey, look, I've got my mortgage. That's certainly part of it, but my property taxes are definitely a factor in the affordability of a home, because when someone's budgeting, hey, look, I can afford this much per month, they're not just budgeting, hey, this is how much the mortgage is, this is what the APR is. They're not doing just that. They're saying, all right, I got to take a look at DCAD and say, hey, look, I got to factor in $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on top of my mortgage. So I will respectfully disagree, James. I believe those two things are unfortunately hand in hand, and something which we need to address again next session as we did last.
No, I think you're totally right, and I think my point was basically property taxes are something you factor in after like you're owning the home. But if you can't even get a down payment to enter to enter into home ownership, it's a conversation that a lot of people aren't even having. But I do want to give you all both the opportunity to talk about the property tax legislation that was passed. Again, my colleague Joshua Fechter has done some analysis, and he's showing that although people might still gripe about it, it does seem to be working, and that property taxes are at least being controlled. And so how satisfied are you all currently with how property taxes are in the state, given the last couple of tries that we've had at this?
So we need to do more. Last session, I carried the bill on the House side dealing with the largest tax cut in the history of the state of Texas. It was $18 billion. $13 billion of it was what's called rate compression, actually lowering your taxes. We increased your homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000, and we put a cap on commercial appraisals of about 20%. And we're seeing real change. We are seeing taxes come down, but we have to do more. I believe I've seen estimates out there that we were going to have another surplus this session in excess of $20 billion. I haven't seen that specifically, but that's what I am hearing. I believe last session we had a surplus of over $30 billion, and I know it is a priority of the governor as well for us to take another run at lowering your taxes, because again, it goes into home affordability. And honestly, whether you were in Nathan's district or my district, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, it is by far the #1 issue for all my constituents. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or a Libertarian. The property tax issue is real for you. And so we are committed to addressing it again, as we did last session. It was a good first step. I'm glad we got there. We worked with the Senate to get there. Governor signed the bill. It was a great result. But I know the Senate and the House want to do more. I know the governor is 110% behind us doing more. And so I think you'll see another stab at it. We got to see what the surplus is next session. But we'll definitely take another run at lowering your property taxes.
And I agree with a lot of what Morgan said, and he is one of the most knowledgeable people in the legislature on the subject, and there was a lot of good work done dating back to the Senate Bill 2 from the 86th session, which capped property tax increases. I had misgivings about it, I still do, but it does seem to be working in many respects. In fact, under the Texas Taxpayers and Research TITARA, they cited a statistic that incomes have been increasing faster than property taxes. Nevertheless, we do have very high property taxes. I did vote for the $18 billion property tax reduction last session. I would love to lower property taxes further. Where we diverge is I would do it 9th, after 8 other things. I would do it after putting money in public education, after putting money in healthcare. After putting money in water, we put about $1 billion into new water infrastructure. We probably should have put between 3 and 5. After putting money into electricity, after putting money into state government systems, we have dilapidated old buildings, we have ridiculously antiquated computer systems, and whether you are a business or a private individual, you rely on state government for services, and it cannot provide them under current circumstances. We need raises for the people who work for the government. These are big price tag items, and there's several others, transportation, there's just a lot of things we need to do. We already did lower property taxes. Again, I'd love to make them lower, but not at the expense of building for the future. So I want to look out 30 years from now and see what my kids who are then going to be in their 40s or 50s and say, Dad, I sure am glad you cut our property taxes by $137. No, man, build me a geothermal hydrogen production something or other, right? I don't want to be flippant about the subject of property taxes. It's enormously popular. Paying them is enormously unpopular. I like tax breaks, but I think we have a bigger obligation here. And I think tax reduction ought to take a back seat to some of the things we failed to do. A couple notes about surpluses. $14.7 billion of last session's $31 billion surplus was leftover COVID money from the federal government. It's not coming back. About $15 billion is what it would have cost to fund public education, an area where Representative Meyer has done a lot of great work. About $15 billion would have been necessary to get us up to the level that we funded it in 2019, adjusted for inflation. There goes the whole surplus right there. Now, I do think that our economy is doing so well that we can afford to shift some of the share of school funding to the state away from the local governments to maybe bring down property taxes, which is why I supported the legislation. But sales taxes are down this cycle. We hit an economic recession. Once you lower property taxes, you are locked in. We are fixed at having to spend money to bring property taxes down forever. And so in a sense, it's kind of unconservative. Whereas if we blow $3 billion, if we spend $3 billion on infrastructure for new water, that's a one-time investment. There's a maintenance cost, but we've made an investment that will pay returns forever. If we put money in public education, that's fixed, that's forever, but the returns are forever. So I think property tax is something that we all need to look at. I hope we can bring them down. It is not a priority for me.
I want to ask one more question about affordability before moving on. And Chairman Meyer, you were talking about permitting, and there has been interest from some of the big three in looking at permitting and how we can speed this up. But some of the issues that housing advocates have talked about in terms of speeding or getting rid of some zoning restrictions as well, when it comes to the state getting involved at looking at those issues, which theoretically or I think commonly thought of as local issues. How do you all see that with the state looking at things like permitting and zoning as a local issue? Because maybe the cities might not be very receptive to you all looking at it and getting involved. I mean, there has been a lot of dueling between the state and the cities.
There has, and I think that our role on a state level is to allow the municipalities to do what they should be able to do. However, there are certain circumstances, and there was a bill last session that dealt with some of that on a city level, that they weren't providing the services, or they were trying to overstep their bounds, or they were trying to kind of get into areas where they don't need to be. I'm with you. I think that is a partnership. However, I believe the speaker has it as one of the interim charges, is taking a look at zoning and affordable housing. And so I think it is an issue that you have to tackle in conjunction with the cities and the municipalities, because to your point, correct, do we as a state really need to be telling them how to zone part of north part of Dallas? I mean, that's probably a little much, but I do think it's a conversation that we need to have at the state level, but in partnership with our municipalities.
Do you think the locals would be receptive to that type of partnership, just given the state of play?
Certainly. I mean, I'm sure, like Nathan, I have great relationships with a lot of members of the Dallas City Council, Highland Park Council, University Park Council. It's always an open dialogue. I think folks want to make it on the outside more of a war between the state and municipalities when 95% of what we do, we work in conjunction with one another to understand, all right, what works on a city level versus what works on a state level, what is y'all's role, what is our role. There are ongoing conversations, I'm sure Nathan has it, I have, with city council members to make sure that we are working together to achieve the goal. Because I guarantee to you, if you were to talk to a Dallas City Council member, any one of them, no matter where they represent, they would agree, hey, look, we need to get our permitting under control. We need to get this streamlined. And so when we both have the same goal, we can work together. This working together concept is something we really need to push out there more, not just on this issue, but a lot of other issues, that we can work together, maybe have different goals, but trying to solve a similar problem for our constituents, which overlaps, should be our singular goal. And so I think we can do that in working in conjunction with municipalities to address these issues.
And I like that answer, and I'll just emphasize what you were saying built into your question. It's very, very difficult, but I do think there's a general recognition it's going to require state and local cooperation. You're dealing with private property rights, and there's not a clear partisan breakdown on this issue. So that makes it even less fun. You can't just blindly throw rocks at each other. We're going to have to solve this. But I think I have very little to add to Morgan's answer.
Okay, I want to talk about higher education. We are at Dallas College after all. And I want to talk about the DEI ban that was passed in the last legislative session. The Dallas Morning News has done a lot of great coverage on some of the fallout that has happened. 131 scholarships have been either stopped or had to be amended, meaning that there's clear ramifications for students who perhaps no longer have access or have more difficulty gaining access to higher education because of the result of the DEI ban. Dallas Morning News, again, just did a story about LGBT centers closing in university campuses around the state. Looking at that kind of fallout, are there any regrets there? Because it does seem like 131 scholarships is significant. And it's not just 131 people. Some of these are like multiple awardees, and for people from underrepresented backgrounds, for women. Sometimes it's even people from very, very specific things, like a woman from Arath County who wants to go to Tarleton State. So do you all see any issues with some of the effects from that ban?
Well, you've mentioned the issues. There are issues. There is fallout. I knew it would cause problems. There were issues that spurred the movement to get rid of DEI programs. There were questions about the efficacy of the programs, about the fairness of the programs, and those were legitimate things to discuss. We all recognize the goal, and the stated goal that the bill addressed was diversity in hiring and higher education. The fallout has gone down to students as well as faculty. But as I said at the time that the bill was passed, we're saying that we recognize a common interest in diversity in hiring of higher education, and our solution to the problem is to take away the only thing we've ever done to try to increase diversity in hiring and higher education. It was lazy, and it's what happens when populism preempts policy. I think we could have had a much more mature political conversation, spent a little time looking at studies, evaluating what changes. What do we need to change about these programs to achieve the goal, to address the concerns about people who think they're ineffective or unfair? But instead, we came in with a wrecking ball, and now we're surprised that there's problems. If we did that in our environmental management, we would be wiping out species. Oh, wait, we have for a century. And we should have learned from that, right? So I think we need to go back and now maybe do what we should have done in the first place, which is re-examine the goals, which is to promote opportunity and diversity in all spheres, and everyone agrees on that, and try to clean up the damage.
Chairman Meyer, seeing the fallout, seeing what has happened, do you think that there require any changes? Are you hearing that from any of your constituents?
No, I'm not. And James knows this, I fully supported Senator Creighton's bill. I fully supported the DEI ban. And it had to do with a real problem where colleges and universities in the state of Texas were getting away from teaching engineering, away from focusing on the liberal arts, away from focusing on the actual job of a higher education institution is education. That is its job. not indoctrination. And I realize a number in this room are going to disagree with me, and that's okay. That's okay. We can have differing opinions, and we can have a discussion about it. But this is something which was very important. I worked with Senator Creighton. I supported the bill. And when universities and colleges get back to what their core function is, which is educating our young people, we're all better off for it.
Okay. So you're satisfied with sort of the state of play here that has happened after the ban?
Yes, I'm fully supportive of the legislation.
Okay. I think we should move on perhaps to school vouchers, because that was probably the thing that kept us in session.
Nothing controversial today.
Well, because that's probably one of the things that kept us in session for most of the year last year. And I think this sort of goes hand in hand with the way the primaries ended up. There was a lot of Republican lawmakers who were deemed insufficiently supportive of this type of legislation, and many of them will not be coming back. And there's a very, very different makeup of the House, which was where I think the trouble was in terms of passing the voucher legislation. And so I want to hear from both of you, just sort of when it comes to the issue of vouchers, what is it that you would like to see, or what is the conversation that you would like to be having? We know very clearly what the governor wants, which is essentially a almost universal vouchers here, which is what held up a lot of the people who couldn't vote for that. But what is the conversation that you all would like to be having around vouchers? Senator Johnson, if you want to start.
None.
Yeah.
I would like to not have a conversation about vouchers. I do want to emphasize something up here. I think that Chairman Meyer and I are going to disagree on this subject, and I agree with him that we should be able to disagree, and that I want to have the courage to tell you things you don't want to hear on property taxes, and he wants to have the courage to tell you things that you disagree with him on DEI, and that's important in our legislature. So we're going to talk about vouchers, and we're going to disagree, and that is okay. And if we're forced to talk about vouchers, I think that it's okay for Morgan and I to intensely disagree on the subject, but agree that a subject about which we intensely disagree should not tear down the subject on which we totally do agree. And that was funding our public schools. And linking the entire public education package last session to a voucher provision was the single biggest mistake of the session. And as far as what the discussion is going to be based on last year, there was one check campaign contribution for $6 million to the governor, who then spent $6 million on a bunch of Republican primaries going after people who didn't vote for school vouchers. So are we really talking about school vouchers, or are we talking about a campaign contribution? Now, in fairness to many people who believe that vouchers are good, and they're out there, I don't. But the whole subject sure has been tinged with politics, and it has threatened the independence of the House of Representatives in the process. So what I don't want to be talking about vouchers when we're talking about vouchers is who's going to be in the legislature next session. And that's really what makes me angriest. I can live if the majority of the legislature passes a voucher program about something and it's streamlined, I'll live with it. Education will go on, I suspect. But as to the merits of a voucher program, I think that it is an unsophisticated way to approach a sophisticated problem. And I think it's tantamount to giving up on public education. And we have a constitutional obligation to make sure there is a public education. And I understand these are public dollars going to private schools to hopefully replace public education to some extent. But there's not good evidence that it works. There is good evidence that they are fertile beds of corruption. There is good evidence that the vouchers end up going to kids whose parents are already sending them to private schools. In the meantime, if the project is to improve public education, and again, I know Chairman Meyer has been committed to public education for a long time. We'll discuss vouchers. But if we agree on that, why don't we concentrate on ways to improve public education where it's deficient? And we know that some of it has to do with factors outside of public education. There are social factors that affect this that we're not addressing. But the schools themselves, we have 1882 schools where a charter can come over and come in and take over a failing school. We have PEG schools where parents whose kids are in D-rated schools can apply to another place. We have choice within public school districts. We have charter schools. Gosh, there's one other one I'm forgetting. There are ways we can give people choices. There are ways we can improve schools. The state took over Houston ISD. It's a huge area of controversy. But one thing you could say about that conversation is people are trying to figure out what it takes to run a good public school system. That's the conversation I'd like to be having, instead of saying, you know what, we just stink at educating kids. Let's turn it over to the private sector and we'll buy dish soap and we'll buy education and we'll have winners and losers in an open market for public education. And some of the kids will go to winner schools and some will go to loser schools, but in the long run, it will all work out. I don't believe in that. I think we need a single vision for public schools, and those who want to go to private schools have that option.
Can I just push back before we go to Chairman Meyer in terms of, it's clear that you don't want to have a conversation about vouchers. But
it's kind of a monologue.
Yeah, but isn't there an argument perhaps to be made for lower income kids who perhaps are not going to the best schools, that this could be an opportunity for them? And perhaps if it was a more limited version of a voucher bill, or is that just not?
No, I think that's a terrible idea. I think it's a rotten idea. First of all, lower income kids, if they get a $10,000 voucher, still cannot afford a $20,000 school. I know what it costs to send a kid to private school. How many private schools want to throw open their doors to lower income kids anyway? If you want a voucher program that's
I think some private schools do throw to low income.
How many of them? How many?
There's a lot of Catholic schools who provide a lot of financial.
And are they going to pick up 5 million kids in our public school system?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think so.
No, I see your point.
The other,
I just wanted to ask the question.
I think it's a very fair question. And I think there are genuine motivations behind people who support vouchers that want to help kids get out of difficult areas. I just think it's ill-conceived. And not only the money issue, if we really want to tailor vouchers to kids for whom the public school system is failing, let's have a voucher for all the D and F students and see how many private schools open their doors to educate those kids. If that's really what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Chairman Meyer?
Sure. And first off, I think that was a fair question as it relates to those lower income. I want to talk about the legislation itself, because I was talking to a constituent yesterday, very politically involved, very politically active, about that legislation. And I think people have a misunderstanding of what the legislation was. First off, it provided $7 billion more in public education funding. It increased the daily allotment from like $6,160 to $6,700. It provided teacher pay raises. It provided $750 million for special needs children. My districts, from an analysis, my 3 school districts, because that legislation failed, lost $280 million. $280 million. Now let's talk about the school choice portion of it. It was not universal. It wasn't even close to universal. The number of kids per year that could utilize the school choice, 20,000 kids per year, out of over 5 million kids in our public education system. And it was also prioritized, lower income and special needs kids. So this thought or idea that 5 million kids or 25% of the student population is going to get up and leave is just not factually accurate. There wasn't the funding for it. It was intended as a program for 20,000 kids. Let's see how we work. Let's see how it works. Let's get it in. Let's do it for 2 years. But also, again, that died on the House floor, as did $7 billion for our public education funds. And as the senator correctly points out, he has been a champion of funding public education. I have been a champion of funding public education. I was on the Public Education Committee 2 different sessions and joint authored the largest infuse of capital into public education in HB 3 2 sessions ago. So the point is, I want everyone to understand what that legislation was, because I think people think it's for 5 million kids. It was not. And also what that legislation did, which is put more money into our public schools. Yeah.
So Chairman Meyer, I just want to be very clear, because it's clear that we have 2 very different perspectives on the legislation, but for you, just for clarity, you're saying that you would be supportive of this legislation should it come up next session because of the funding that it would bring to your district?
Yes, if this legislation came up again, I absolutely support that legislation, as well as, the entirety of that legislation to take a look at school choice for the 40,000 kids total, 20,000 kids per year out of 5 million kids.
Okay, but you are also supportive of school, or I'm just trying to pinpoint here the reasoning for the support. Is it because of the funding, or you're also supportive of school vouchers, or both?
I'm supportive of the funding, and I'm supportive of the school portion of it, which looks to take a look at helping out lower income children and children with special needs, to your point, who could be stuck in a failing school.
Okay. Do you want to weigh in on anything, Senator Johnson?
I've talked so much already.
Okay. I do want to talk about something else, because I think this conversation that we're having is, there are very clearly different perspectives here between the two of you. But the two of you work together all the time, and you have seemingly a very cordial relationship. One thing that I'm looking at as a political observer is the batch of new candidates who are coming in do not have an interest really in bipartisanship. And there's been a call from many in the House Republican, well, the Republicans in the House, to perhaps get rid of Democratic chairs, which we know has been a longstanding tradition, a tradition that Speaker Strauss really pushed for. That tradition has sort of evaporated in the Senate, and I'm curious to hear sort of what your thoughts are on that. Senator Johnson, you've I think since you've been there, you've kind of experienced the lack of Democratic chairs. And now that Senator Whitmire is the mayor in Houston, Lieutenant Governor Patrick has said there won't be any Democratic chairs. And for you, Chairman Meyer, I'm just curious what you think about how that will impact the working relationships in the House and maybe across the chambers. I mean, are you supportive of getting rid of Democratic chairs?
I think bipartisanship is key to the Texas House. This is why we're able to provide the tax relief. This is why we're able to provide school funding. This is why we're able to provide for infrastructure. And to your point, from Speaker Strauss to Speaker Bonin to Speaker Phelan, I can tell you the number one thing that makes our House work is bipartisanship. We work together. We are not Washington, D.C. by any stretch of the imagination. We work hand in hand with our Republican colleagues, with our Democrat colleagues, with our Republican senators, with our Democrat senators. That's what makes our state government work, is bipartisanship and working with one another. And by way of example, in the State House, to be able to provide this tax relief, we had to vote on a constitutional amendment. And in the State House, you need 2/3 of the members to pass that constitutional amendment. There are only 87 Republicans, only 87. We needed 100 votes to get you that tax relief. We have to continue to work together. If we become DC, we have lost our way. I mean, how much legislation do you see coming out of DC that has actually helped you on a daily basis? How many times have you heard, I get it, each side wants to get on their respective news networks and yell at one another. You're never gonna see Nathan and I do that, ever. Even when we disagree about an issue, we're gonna have that conversation. And that goes with all of my colleagues, regardless of where they fall ideologically. And I'll push back a little bit. You said the new members coming in. I haven't spoken to all of them. Saying that they already don't want any bipartisanship, I think is a stretch.
I think people have signed the commitments.
I think it's a stretch. I do, because unless you've spoken with every single one of those members and they say, hey, I do not want to work with the other side. That's not what I've heard. That's not what they said. But my point to you is this. The House and our state government rather, is built upon all of us working together. And that's why our state is so great. That's why we're able to produce the results that we produce, is by working with Senator Johnson, not yelling at him.
And you've been a chairman, I think, for the last 2 sessions, this time Ways and Means, before you were general investigating. And it doesn't seem to have gotten in the way of your work. I just want to pin down, though, are you supportive of getting rid of Democratic chairs?
I'm supportive of bipartisanship.
Senator Johnson, Senator Johnson, I want to ask you, there has been this statement from Lieutenant Governor Patrick about no more Democratic chairs once Senator Whitmire, who is now the mayor in Houston, leaves the Senate. You have, I think, stood out as one of the people in the Senate doing a lot of great work. You did a lot of work around the grid, some of the nitty-gritty stuff, some of the sort of workhorse stuff that really is what we send legislators there for. and you've been there a couple of sessions. I'm curious. I mean, would you like to be considered for it? Do you think that's a possibility?
Yes and no. Of course, I'd like to be considered for it. I think a lot of Democrats would like to be considered for it. I do not think it's a possibility. Lieutenant Governor believes very strongly that that he's a conservative Republican, and when somebody's a conservative Republican, they can be a chair. He has the power to run the chamber that way. I do not think it's the best way to run the chamber. I think that the way that Speaker Strauss and Speaker Bonin and Speaker Phelan have run the House is a better model. And one of the reasons is because nobody knows everything and no party knows everything. I think it's really actually very productive to have extremists on both sides in the legislature, just not a lot of them, because they're a check on your thinking. And we're all a check on each other's thinking. And then there's just the volume of work. We have a $2.5 trillion economy, 30 million people, the $250, maybe $300 billion budget. Do you really think one party can get all that stuff done? There's a lot of work to do, and one reason I'm able to work in the Senate, I've had conversations with the Lieutenant Governor, and we disagree, and he wins on if we disagree. But there's a lot of work.
Do you want to give a breakdown of how many times he wins?
Often. But there is a lot of work to be done where you're going to need the input from serious legislators who do their homework. The issue is not going to be about the Republican electron versus the Democratic electron. It's just, do we have enough electrons? On the social issues, I also think that it's important that Democrats have a say in disagreements where Republicans want to take a stand. I think there's lots of Republicans that are so thankful there's a Democrat to take the position that they're not allowed to take, to slow things down. I mean, we have got to have the input from all people. And if the House turns like the Senate, to where we have no Democratic chairs, you're really going to lose out on what the people need from their legislature. And frankly, the people who elect their representatives deserve their representatives to have a shot at being a chair. It's part of democracy.
Is that a conversation you'd want to have with the Lieutenant Governor? I mean, we're talking about it here, but
I mean, I have his number.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I think I wish that he would recognize the value of having serious, hardworking, level-headed Democrats as committee chairs, and I think it would be better. He gets to have a different view. I will say I have been able to move a lot of legislation. I've been able to pass a lot of legislation. I actually don't like people saying to me, "Oh, you poor Democrats in the Senate." No, man, I passed 100 bills. We can get work done, but we are not able to contribute at the level that I think would be more beneficial to the state.
Okay, I want to talk about one more thing in terms of sort of this bipartisanship, because I want to talk about artificial intelligence and AI in the upcoming elections. We've seen some instances in places like New Hampshire where there was this Joe Biden robocall sort of misleading voters about how to work in the primary. And in doing some research, I was interested to find out that Chairman Meyer, you had passed legislation, I think back in 2019, 2021?
Yeah, 2019.
Yeah, 5 years ago, sort of getting at this way long ago, and that Senator Johnson, you worked to try to amend that legislation to make it even better. And so I think the legislation as it stands says that it is prohibited to use AI if it is in videos for campaigns, if it is intended to influence the election or to, I can't remember the specific.
And released within 30 days of
Within 30
of an
days.
election.
Intent to injure political candidate or influence the results of an election. So, and it is 30 days, which I'm curious about because the campaigns are much longer. And I want to ask about the 30 days now that AI is so available, if there's a reconsideration there about the 30 days. Obviously, it won't happen before this election, but what are the threats that AI can have to this election, and how do you feel about that legislation?
100%. You're absolutely right. So as you stated, James, we passed this legislation in 2019. Before, really, this was a huge issue, and I worked with my good friend, Senator Brian Hughes, in the Senate to make this a reality. And looking back on that legislation now, it is too limited in nature. It only relates to video and the 30-day out.
So not audio, so that Joe Biden robocall wouldn't be covered.
Correct. So we have to go back, and I'm sure Senator Johnson will work with me on this, and Senator Hughes, to expand it. Because AI has developed into something, you watch movies from 20 years ago and Terminator and whatever, not there, but it's definitely evolved to such a way to where it's a dangerous tool. And it's a dangerous tool not only in our elections, but in our everyday lives. And so we really need to take a look at expanding that legislation to address what the current state of play is. That was like our the foot in the door in 2019. We didn't understand or didn't know how broadly it could be used or how it would be used, quite frankly. And so we need to look to expand that legislation this next time to protect those innocent victims, and not just politically, I'm saying. I think we need to broaden it because it is used so harmfully, in such a harmful manner on all platforms now. We need to take a look at that legislation. I'm sure we will next session to strengthen it, enforce it, and make it more robust.
And I think actually AI was used on some of the Republican incumbents who lost their seat. Senator Johnson, do you have anything to add in terms of AI?
It's a great follow to some of the disagreements we've had here. There's not going to be. I don't think there's going to be.
I try to get an ebb and flow going. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think there'll be any partisan disagreement over this subject. And it was Chairman Meyer who passed that bill in 2021. I don't know, did my bill die in the House? When I was enhancing what he did, I was taking it kind of backwards in technology and applying it to still shots. That you cannot, whether you're talking about advanced AI audio or the video or a still shot, where you manipulate something to make people believe something that in reality is not true, right? You can draw a cartoon of me, that's okay. Can you add, please don't add, can you add gray to my hair? Can you alter my face? When you're really trying to change it or deliberately changing the words, I mean, we're not living in the most high integrity election environment of the recent century. And so with the kind of ethical boundaries loosened already and a tool as powerful as AI, we absolutely need to proactively get in there and try to restrain the abuse.
We will start taking questions. You can see Matt Ewalt is standing there by the microphone. It looks like a gentleman is already going over there, so I'll leave it to him.
And just a reminder to everyone who is coming up to ask a question, make sure there is a question mark at the end of your question. More out of respect for everyone gathered here and making sure we can get to as many questions as possible. And for those who are joining online, you can also ask your question at texastribune.org/ask.
Good afternoon. First, thanks to the Texas Tribune for hosting this. Chairman, Senator, thank you for your public service, because it really is a public service, and I'm sure your families miss you. As you talk about home ownership, let's really talk about living. And so my point is, we talk about property tax reduction, but one of the biggest, a lot of the property tax reductions are offset by the insurance cost reductions. And so what is the state of Texas doing? How are you looking at that from a home affordability perspective? But the other thing is, insurance rates impact renters as well. So it's not about home ownership, it's about housing, both for homeowners and renters. And when you start looking at the net impact of the insurance rates, particularly when you include redlining factors, it goes to the disposable income available to families, even renters. So is there an attention being paid to that in the House or in the Senate? That's the question. And then the other thing is, from a population growth standpoint, what we didn't talk about today was water. And when you look at the forecasted population growth, but in North Texas, for water, I mean, I know there's a House caucus on water, but how is water being addressed in either the House or the Senate as we look at the population growth rates out? Thank you.
Okay, so I think the questions are, how are we dealing with the rising cost of insurance, homeowners insurance, and addressing water needs for the future?
You can take the water questions on you. On the insurance, I can tell you literally yesterday, I don't know where the gentleman went. Where'd you go? There you go. That was the top line item. That really was. It was specifically speaking with folks about it being a priority and how we would be hearing about it. And funny, hearing about it just today, about home insurance rates specifically. And so I know it is a priority of the speaker. I'll let Nathan speak to the Senate. But, I'm in my 5th term and going hopefully into my 6th, is that really hasn't been a top line item. It just hasn't. We haven't, you know, people always nibble around the edges and people complain about their homeowner insurance or car insurance or whatever. But to your point, it is now at the forefront of conversations of things that the House wants to and will tackle next session. I don't know the details of it. I'm only on the Ways and Means Committee. We have a separate insurance committee that will be addressing that. But it's funny you raised that. Like, literally on a call yesterday and said that's going to be a top issue for your constituents, and here you are absolutely proving that point. Thank you.
It is also an interim charge in the Senate, and likewise, I don't have the answer. It's a relatively new problem. It's a serious problem, and it's not easy. You also brought up something very important about renters and homeowners. It is not just about home ownership. It is about affordability of housing. And one thing that we didn't talk about in the property tax context is that we're using sales tax dollars to buy down property taxes. So moving on to water, there's an area where I feel like the state has failed to invest at the levels that it should. Senator Charles Perry from West Texas is kind of the leading voice in the Senate on water. Some of our experts in water over on the House side, unfortunately, have retired. But I'm optimistic that we will make some investments. I'll be advocating for more investments because you're right, water is a 50-year foresight kind of thing. So we need to get going on that right now. Desalinization is becoming viable economically, much more so with brackish water inland than it is with seawater. But there's a lot of things we're looking at, and we're going to need to, because also the explosion of AI data centers and manufacturing and all the things that we love coming to Texas use water. So you've identified two extremely difficult issues.
Okay, we've got 5 people, 6 people, maybe 10 minutes, so keep it short.
I'll try my best. First off, thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Texas Tribune, for hosting this event. Senator Johnson, you're talking about gray hair. I'm lucky right now, I don't have any coming in yet, but I want to talk about young people, right? And just how, you know, in Texas and overall nationally, the kind of youth vote is dropped off a little bit. It's around high 20s and then low 30s around the nation. So what solutions do you guys have planned or devised to kind of prop up the youth vote and also our voices to make sure they're being heard on a state level?
I mean, that's really an electoral question. If either one of us figures out how to motivate the youth vote, we win every cycle. I think it's important for young people. I guess I have a little bit of fatigue of everybody saying, what are you going to do to get the youth vote out? I want young people to realize that the future is theirs. This is their country. And I think my latest strategy, this is very sincere, is I want to appeal to the youth vote not by saying it's your job to vote. I want to say, I need you to vote. And young people can get their parents to vote, and they can get their friends to vote. I think the youth vote has the opportunity not just to represent a large demographic, but a multiplier of demographics. And so really appeal to youth to step in and save their country. Instead of telling them what they need to do, ask them for their help.
You can be an influencer for democracy.
Right, and I would just dovetail on what he said. I think it's also about listening. Like, for me, my oldest daughter is going to be a first-time voter this November. Hopefully she votes for her dad. And listening to her and her concerns, youth just have a different perspective on life than the two of us sitting up here. And I think for far too long, I will say, I do think it's changing. I don't know if the statistics bear that out, but I am seeing a much higher level of engagement by younger people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats alike, than when I first was elected. I didn't see that as much. People, we had the college Republicans or college Democrats, and they were somewhat engaged or whatever. But now, having gone to my daughter's high school and seeing the level of engagement, it's up, and it's up on both sides. And I think it's their job to understand your ideas are welcome. And just because you're 18 or 16 or 20 or 22, you have a different perspective than I do. And I'm just telling you, eyes wide open with my 18-year-old daughter and my 16-year-old daughter, for that matter, they have a different view of the world. And sometimes I don't think about it the way they do because I'm not their age. And I think it's fascinating, and folks like us and other legislators, I know the same way. It's about listening to y'all's views and understanding you have a different view of the world than us. I think that automatically makes you more engaged when you know you have a voice. So I think it's incumbent upon the Democrats, it's incumbent upon the Republicans to say, come on. And even if we disagree, come talk to me. Come talk to Senator Johnson. No matter your political perspective, I will welcome it, especially if it's different, because it opens my eyes to different types of issues that I might not otherwise see.
We're grateful you're here.
Next question.
As you can tell, I've voted in quite a few elections. I've not missed one. I'm concerned about this upcoming election. When our elections department cannot look in the tabulators and verify the equipment inside, there's a problem. What are you guys going to do about it?
I think our elections are very secure.
How about it, Mr. Meyer? We find out who votes for who.
Well, I think election integrity is of utmost importance. I think we strive every session to increase election integrity. I think we've made great strides to do it. And as a guy who just went through a primary, for those that didn't know, and luckily went through a recount as well, out of 24,000 votes that were cast in my primary, after a recount, hand by hand, I gained 15 votes out of 24,000. Similarly, I was in a recount in 2018, I believe, and there was like 75,000, 80,000. These numbers are a little longer ago, I don't remember. At the end of the recount, I gained like 20 votes out of like 80,000 cast. But to your point, sir, we always need to strive. I don't know where you went, so I can't speak with you. Oh, there you are. We always can strive to do better because we want those who are eligible to vote. We want to make sure people's votes are counted that are cast. And we need to do and strive every session to make sure our elections are safe, and we will do so again next session.
And let me be less dismissive. I apologize. I don't mean to be dismissive, but I bristle at the question because you are engaged and you are impassioned about your politics, and you've been fed information about the insecurity of our elections that is false. The Attorney General spent 22,000 hours trying to find some voter fraud over the course of a year, and he found like 5 people who forgot to update their address. This has been a myth perpetuated to support the Trump big lie that the election was stolen. I absolutely believe our elections should be secure. I support working with Morgan Meyer, and I appreciate your concerns, but there is not a crisis in the integrity of our elections. Audit after audit after audit have upheld the good work that our elections officials do, and our constant attack on them makes people not want to work for our elections, which makes them more vulnerable, not less vulnerable to manipulation. So I appreciate your concern.
Thank you for the question. Next question.
Yes, Senator Meyer, is really directed to you. Let's go back to this voucher issue. The idea that having a foreign school come in and create a corporation for schools in an area. My question to you is, have you had a conversation, a lengthy conversation yet, with your legislative friends out in the rural West Texas towns and counties? Do you know what the voucher system would do to those public school districts? They're barely hanging on by a thread right now. Have you had a conversation? What is your conversation like when you're speaking to a rural county out in West Texas or down in South Texas?
We, as you might imagine, respectfully disagree with the issue. There are a number of rural members who voted basically against school choice because they are doing what they believe their constituents want. They are representing their districts. And so therefore they took those votes and they did what they believed was right for the purpose that you are stating right now. So yeah, I've had conversations on this topic. And as Nathan and I keep going back to, I just think it's important to stress on this topic and other topics where good people, can vehemently disagree about an issue and still shake hands after the fact. That's what's important. So yes, sir, I absolutely have spoken with the rural members. We've had great in-depth conversations. I get their point of view of the world. And although we may differ at the end of the day, the fact that we can have these conversations in a cordial and good way, I think is as important as anything else.
I think just to summarize, the question was about the impact on rural schools of school voucher legislation, and you're saying those members have done what's right for their district and you're going to do what's right for your district.
Correct.
Okay. Next question.
How you doing? My name is Ricky Perry. On the public education thing, I'm for that. Excuse me. But I'm also for homeschooling, in private, the private sector too. So I just like to say that. The second thing is when Trump was in office, far as in my community, from what I seen, prices were down, gas prices was down, groceries were down. There was a lot of black businesses opening up. So, we appreciate that. And the last 4 years has been devastating. And the thing I would like to ask is, with us letting all the migrants in through the borders and giving them billions and billions of dollars, shouldn't we block that off and take care of our own home first, right here? Get us correct, with the funds and everything. They're getting all the funds. Maybe we should really, block it off and put all that into what we're doing and trying to help ourselves and, go ahead and make America great again,
So your question is about more money for border security so that more money could be invested in the state, sort of summarizing that?
No. I'm saying that if we have millions of migrants coming in and we're giving them money and funding, then to me that's kind of like a shot in the foot, because we're working on us here in America. So let's close off, right? Let's take care of us first. Get ourselves on point, right? Get our own house on point, cut our own lights on and everything. And then we can allow in, or buy in, and, we can make America great again.
We only have a few minutes left, so I guess I'm not aware that there's any state programs giving money to undocumented migrants, but if somebody wants to...
There aren't, but I think to his point, we are absolutely doing everything we can to secure our border, and it is absolutely a priority for us to do it. We in the state legislature have spent billions of dollars on securing our border because, to your point, it is a huge issue. It is a very big problem. Right now, currently, our governor is doing a great job at prioritizing this as well, because we absolutely have to secure our border, to your point.
Yeah, everyone believes in a secure border. I think Trump is a maniacal dictator wannabe, so I don't support him. I think America is great. I don't think that immigration is going to take America's greatness away. I do believe that we need a secure border, humane policy, lots of judges, lots of technology, and we need some agreements, bilateral agreements with other countries. But the inability to take care of people who live here in terms of health, education, and infrastructure is not a function of the border. It's a separate issue and one that we're going to have to work on because it is a crisis, but it's not the thing that's dictating the rest of U.S. or state policy.
Thank you for the question.
Yep, we're going to make time for just 2 quick questions here to close the program.
My question has to do with a lot of the property taxes. While that's great for homeowners, it does not affect a lot of renters in the sense that while landlords do pay property taxes, that you might not necessarily see that reflected in your rent. For instance, if the property taxes come down, the rent might stay the exact same even though they're paying less in property taxes, so that way they can profit more off renters. What is the legislature plan to do about that?
Well, for us, that's part of the reason. I understand your point about the landlords, but that's part of the reason that for the first time in the history of the state of Texas, through our legislation, we put a cap on commercial property or on apartment buildings, so forth, and so on. Because up until this legislation, their appraisals, unlike our homesteads that could only go up 10%, their appraisals could go up 50%, 100%, 150%. So I heard from, honestly, a number of apartment owners, a lot of small business owners, a lot of restaurant owners about that commercial cap. And to your point, the thought and the hope, and I understand your position on it, is that certainly once that's capped and more stable, the rent then can be capped and become more stable. And that was part of the intent behind that 20% cap on commercial property. My committee, the Ways and Means Committee, is studying that as we speak. We're going to have a hearing I believe in September, to take a look to see what type of effect it's having for homeowners and renters, to see if we can improve upon what we did last session.
I think it's a very important concern you raise. If we had a nice buyer's market from the rental standpoint, if we had a glut of apartments, I think we would be pretty likely to see property tax relief for landlords be passed on in the form of rent. In a very tight rental market, which is what we have particularly in urban areas in Texas, it is far less likely that you will see property taxes to the owners be passed on to tenants. I'm glad the committee's looking at it. I think we need to look more at it, and it also kind of begs the question of should we be using sales tax dollars, which renters pay, to buy down property tax dollars for homeowners?
Noticing a theme with the answer, Senator Johnson. We've got the final question here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Christina Van Wasbergen. I'm the North Texas reporter for Courthouse News Service, and I want to thank you all for having this conversation here today. And my question is, we have seen news reports of some Texans, including the wife of North Texas radio host Ryan Hamilton, being unable to access miscarriage care because of the state's abortion ban. And at the same time, we've also seen a recent study that's come out that says that infant mortality has actually increased after the state's ban. So my question for both of you is, do you think that these are things that the legislature needs to be dealing with? And do we maybe need to see some changes in legislation? Thank you.
I appreciate the question as the author of 4 pieces of legislation intended to both restore reproductive rights and protect those individuals and entities, including corporations in Texas, who would help women leave the state in order to seek abortion care. I appreciate your concerns, and I think the state has made a grave mistake in banning abortion. It is not something that a state that believes in limited government ought to do. We should be disagreeing about these things in private. And yes, absolutely, we should reverse a lot of the draconian bans that have been enacted, particularly in the last 2 sessions.
Chairman Meyer, do you want to close this out?
Sure. Obviously, I am pro-life. There is just not a question. That being said, I do believe that we need to take a look at additional exceptions in the state of Texas. I'm not sure if something could get out of the Senate. I quite frankly don't know if something could even get out of the House. But I do believe that we should take a look at rape and incest exceptions in addition to the life of the mother in the next coming legislative session. I just don't know if we have.
Is that something you would support?
I would, yes. And I said it 2 years ago, and yes, I do support broadening the rape and incest exception, about still remaining pro-life, and I think you can have both.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Chairman Meyer. Thank you so much, Senator Johnson. And thank you all. Thank you, Dallas College, for hosting us.